From deceptively serene lakefronts whose shores are roamed by the ghostly manifestations of those claimed by the cold, dark deep of their waters centuries past, to historic graveyards where it's rumored the restless spirits of bodies desecrated and moved without permission are stuck forever seeking justice. Are you sure you're ready to brave our second list of picks for some of the most chillingly haunted places in Indiana? Number 5. The Culbertson Mansion State Historic Site. The Culbertson Mansion State Historic Site, which is located near the Ohio River off of East Main Street out of Albany, Indiana, is a prominent historic abode that once played home to one of the richest men in the state, being William Culbertson of its namesake. Historically, in 1867, construction of this Second Empire-style 25-room, 20,000-square-foot mansion was started at a cost of $120,000, with the building process concluding through November of 1869. Following Culbertson's passing in 1892, the property would be willed to his third wife, who would end up auctioning the estate and its contents off in 1899 to one John McDonald. Following John's passing, the American Legion would obtain the property from his daughter, Mrs. Helen Croxall, after which they would perform a series of repairs and modernizations in order to bring the expanse up to code for meetings. Following its passing through a handful of different owners, unfortunately through the 1960s, the mansion came under threat of demolition. However, a local historic group called Historic New Albany would purchase the property, and in 1964 would set to work on renovations necessary for it to be open to the public as a museum. More recently, in 1976, the state would take over operations of said museum, and would fund further restorations, many of which actually continue to this day. In the present, the Culbertson Mansion State Historic Site remains open to the public as both a landmark and museum, offering a range of exhibits pertaining to the family and its history, alongside all manner of annual events and touring options of both the historic and paranormal variety. Over the years, staff, volunteers, and visitors to this weathered estate have reported a range of supernatural encounters experienced across its bounds, including odd electrical malfunctions, strange sounds heard emanating from thin air after hours, instances of entire rooms found rearranged, and run-ins with a mysterious figure that glides about. Some describe the constant feeling of never truly being alone, while others tell of shadowy figures that roam around the carriage house. One more commonly encountered entity on site is said to be that of a female apparition usually spied gazing from the third floor, that's thought to be the spirit of Eliza Culbertson, William's first wife, who passed on in 1865, leaving 5 children behind. Disturbingly, many tell that William's subsequent wives were not kind to these children, resulting in their mother's great unrest. Number 4. Crown Hill Cemetery. Crown Hill Cemetery, which is located off of 38th Street out of Indianapolis, Indiana, is a privately owned funerary establishment that acts as final resting place to a number of prominent Hoosiers, including to President Benjamin Harrison, to renowned poet James Whitcomb Riley, and even to notorious gangster John Dillinger. Historically, in 1863, Crown Hill was established in response to overcrowding at Green Lawn Cemetery courtesy of the Civil War, and in 1866, the federal government would purchase 1.4 acres of land on which to begin its burying grounds, starting with the reinterment of more than 700 Union soldiers, many of whom had died in Indianapolis and had previously rested within Green Lawn. In 1875, a Gothic chapel and vault were erected on site. Over the following decades, Crown Hill's grounds would be expanded upon heavily, and in 1911, a further 40 acres acquired at the yard's northwestern end would result in the by then 550-acre cemetery being recognized as the third largest non-governmental graveyard in the whole of the U.S. Over its many years, a good number of graves from other yards were transferred to Crown Hill. By the 1930s, the yard held the remains of around 100,000, and by the late 1970s, that number had increased to around 155,000. Unfortunately, preservation of the expanse's various monuments and structures has been a chronic concern of the establishment's board, and in 1984, the non-profit Crown Hill Heritage Foundation was formed in order to raise funds necessary for its restoration. In the present, Crown Hill Cemetery remains in operation, and at 555 acres is still actively performing burial, cremation, and other end-of-life services, all the while offering seasonal guided tours from May through October. Not surprising in the least, case, the whole of these aged burying grounds are rumored to harbor the many souls of those interred within, and also the countless restless spirits resulting from waves of reinterments. And those who have braved its bounds have reported extreme cold spots felt through the heat of summer, disembodied footsteps that follow lone walkers around, spook lights that drift eerily about, and encounters with a spectral woman holding a baby, who wanders amongst the graves as if she's lost or seeking something, and who always fades away when addressed or approached. Several informal investigations of the expanse have yielded odd EMF fluctuations, strange readings found on thermal grids, and odd malfunctions in well-maintained gear, while others have detailed encounters with the apparitions of soldiers sighted marching at night who usually disappear into the darkness at an unnatural pace. Lastly, Section 37 harbors a memorial for children that died in the Indianapolis Children's Asylum, the Children's Guardians Home, and the Asylum for Friendless Colored Children. This monument actually sits atop a mass grave containing the remains of around 699 of said children, most of whom were claimed to disease, starvation, or neglect. And from those passing near, infinitely perturbing accounts tell of the disembodied whispers, giggles, and sometimes the crying of this lost youth heard emanating from deep within the earth. Number 3. The Tunnelton Tunnel. The Tunnelton Tunnel, which is also commonly referred to as the Big Tunnel or the Rittner Tunnel, is a 1,731-foot-long shaft located within Lawrence County, Indiana. Its western end lands about 2.5 miles to the east of the unincorporated community of Tunnelton, and that currently serves in CSX Transportation's business dealings. Historically, in 1857, the Big Tunnel was completed, and just 2 years later, in 1859, the community of Tunnelton was platted near. While the tunnel would initially serve the Ohio and Mississippi Railway, over the years it would change hands a number of times, landing under the ownership of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, and also of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad through different periods respectively. In 1898, the Big Tunnel was shortened and brick-lined, and a year later, in 1899, the 1,700-foot companion tunnel, dubbed the Little Tunnel, was turned into a cut. The Tunnelton Big Tunnel remains in use to this day under CSX, who handles freight and railroad operations through the eastern US and into Canada. Disturbingly, a number of legends involving accidental or even malicious deaths around the Tunnelton Tunnel have persisted through the years. One more popular tale even purports that either during construction or its reconstruction, that graves from a nearby cemetery were literally sent sliding through the worksite, spilling bodies, or at least pieces of them, about, and local stories claim this turbulent history has resulted in countless hauntings, with those braving the site reporting extreme cold spots felt through the heat of summer, orbs and strange forms captured in the backgrounds of photography, and the constant feelings of being watched, of being followed, or being touched by someone or something unseen. While fables vary from source to source, one more popular legend surrounds a railroad worker who it's told was decapitated by a passing train or in some other accident while working the tunnel site. From the time of this fateful incident and onward, it's said that his spectral form is often observed in the early mornings and at night, wandering about with a lantern in one hand and his own severed cranium in the other. Another popular legend tells that long ago, a family was killed right where the tunnel now stands, when their horse and buggy crashed into the river just down the hill. And from this very area, many have reported hearing blood-chilling screams and cries for help that emanate from thin air. Several informal investigations of the Tunnelton Tunnel have yielded high EMF levels, chilling EVPs, and abnormal battery death rates and odd malfunctions in well-maintained gear, while others have told of ominous disembodied footsteps that seemingly stalk the living and shadowy figures that toss rocks at those exploring the area. Through the Civil War, soldiers were actually stationed at either end of the Big Tunnel to prevent sabotage, and sadly during this time, one National Guardsman from Fort Rittner was accidentally shot and killed by a fellow guardsman. Now, occasionally, visitors to the tunnel will report hearing a phantom gunshot, followed by cries of panic that fade as quickly as they start up. Lastly, one more infamous death to occur near the Tunnelton Tunnel is unquestionably the 1908 passing of Henry Dixon, a 35-year-old watchman who was found dead around 200 yards from the shaft's entrance. Through the years, many have theorized that old Henry was murdered and that his body was later dragged to the tunnel to be hit by a train as cover. However, the crime remains unsolved, and it's believed that part of Dixon's soul lingers about, watching over the tunnel to ensure no one else suffered the same fate. Number 2. Whihala Beach County Park. Whihala Beach County Park, which is located along the shores of Lake Michigan out of Whiting, Indiana, is a popular public expanse formerly recognized as Whiting Beach. However, its name was actually changed to Whihala to reflect not just the town of Whiting, but to also include the town of Hammond and the Lake County Parks Department. And if you're slow like us and need that explained like we did, Y for Whiting, Ha for Hammond, Law for Lakes, you get it by now. Historically, in 1909, 22 acres of land were purchased from the Forsyth estate for the creation of a new recreation zone along Lake Michigan's shoreline that would be called Whiting Park, after which, as this new park's popularity grew, a bathhouse was constructed on site where, and we literally couldn't make this up, visitors could rent bathing suits for the exceptional price of 10 cents a day, a prospect which, if you ask us, seems questionable at its very best. Through the 1920s, during its winter months, a yearly ice carnival and skating tournament would be held on site, after which a toboggan run was built into the hillside. And through the Great Depression, the gun club building was designed and constructed and the trap shooting range improved upon. Amidst the 1930s, a bunch of small stone abodes known as ferry houses would begin sprouting up across the park, the tallest of which stood at just over 2 feet in height. Strangely, to this day, no one has ever claimed responsibility for their construction, and sadly, by the 1960s, the last of these true tiny homes had all but crumbled. Subsequently, at the turn of the 21st century, the park saw several upgrades, expansions, and remodels, and in more recent years, 2 new ferry houses were actually discovered within the park, the first of which was a stone lighthouse, and the second, a classic domicile which was documented as appearing sometime in 2015. Much like their predecessors, not a soul has spoken up regarding their construction, and to date, their origin is a total and authentic mystery. Whihala Beach County Park remains open into the present, offering a range of trails, a fishing pier, the Woe Zone Water Park, plenty of beachfront, and swim drops when lifeguards are available. Rather chillingly, the whole of this picture-perfect landscape is rumored to harbor countless supernatural infestations, resulting from the lingering souls of those who loved the beach in life since past, and also from the restless spirits of others lost to accidents or worse. And those frequenting the expanse have reported extreme cold spots felt through the summer months, eerie old-timey music heard drifting on the winds, and encounters with swimmers and other beachgoers in old-fashioned attire that disappear shortly after being noticed. One more famous local legend surrounds a figure many refer to as either the Witch of Whihala or as Whihala the Witch. As this story goes, long ago there lived an old woman on the beach who'd resided there for longer than anyone could remember, and who was seemingly there even before the town itself came into being. One day, this old woman came bursting onto the beachfront between the townsfolk and the waters, and began screaming for them to run and for them to save their families. Sadly, thinking her mad, everyone began laughing at the display. They chided her and called her a witch, but the old woman held strong, faced the waters, and raised her hands as shields, as if holding something unseen back. Just then, a large seiche wave manifested, resulting in utter panic and in everyone running for their lives. Tragically and heroically, it's told the old woman was washed away while saving the last child to fall behind. However, following this event, many claim the spirit of this good witch remained, to watch over future beachgoers and to warn those who might face impending danger. A final Whihala story associates itself to the ship the Lady Elgin, which sank in 1860 courtesy of a violent and destructive storm. To date, the ghostly manifestations of what are believed to be the Elgin's victims have been observed walking directly out of the lake's waters onto the shore, clad in sopping wet period clothing, before fading away. Chillingly, following this wreck, actual bodies resulting washed up on this very shore, along with others as far away as North Shore near Highwood, where the mournful, misty apparition of an unidentified female has also occasionally been observed. Number 1. The University of Notre Dame. The University of Notre Dame du Lac, or more simply referred to as just Notre Dame or ND, and based out of none other than Notre Dame, Indiana, just outside of South Bend, is a private Catholic research institution that's 1,261-acre campus includes a slew of structures and prominent landmarks, such as the iconic Golden Dome, Notre Dame Stadium, the Basilica, and the World Life Mural, which is more affectionately called Touchdown Jesus. Historically, land now holding Notre Dame was initially purchased in 1830 under the first priest to be ordained in the US, one Stephen Baden, and in 1842, said land was offered to Edward Sorin of the Congregation of the Holy Cross, after which, through November of the same year, Sorin, accompanied by 8 Holy Cross brothers, would establish a school out of Baden's pre-standing log chapel. While this now prestigious place of learning would open as a humble class of, and we're not kidding here, 2 students. Over the years, as class numbers grew substantially in size, Sorin would have additional structures erected across the expanse, including the old college, the first church, and the earliest main building. By 1844, what had officialized itself as the primary and secondary school of Notre Dame had received its official college charter under the Indiana Grand Assembly. In 1849, Notre Dame would award its first round of degrees, and moving forward, the institution would only see more growth, expansion, and modernization. Notably, through the early 20th century, the school would begin accepting female students, albeit to select studies, with some of the first women to graduate from ND doing so in 1917, and later in 1972, the site would be re-established as fully coeducational. The University of Notre Dame remains open into the present, and has long been recognized as one of the top universities in the country, boasting an enrollment of around 7,500 students while offering close to 75 master's, doctoral, and professional degree programs spread across 8 separate colleges. Deep back into its history, Notre Dame has been shrouded in a massive assortment of campus legends and ghost stories, most of which that have been perpetuated by generations of both faculty and alumni, and those frequenting its bounds have told of extreme cold patches felt in adverse weather, of objects spied moving around on their own or even floating in midair, and of shadowy figures that stalk those wandering about after dark. Intriguingly, Notre Dame's current main building, which actually stands as the third of such constructs on the same plot, is rumored to be haunted or cursed or something, as the first 2 versions of the structure burned to the ground in subsequent fires and under inexplicable circumstances. While this main seems to be holding up for now, many who have braved its bounds have told of strange bursts of heat felt from certain rooms, and of the phantom smell of smoke with no source. Several informal investigations of Indy's campus have yielded high EMF levels, EVPs entailing entire conversations that seem straight out of the past, and odd malfunctions with personal electronics and gear, while others have described encounters with a range of wispy manifestations, or even with full-bodied apparitions in clothing or uniforms that span the college's years of operation. Across the whole of Notre Dame, perhaps no haunted hotspot is quite as famous as Washington Hall, which is surrounded by a slightly concerning number of associated deaths due to accidents or natural causes and the like. Some tell that during its construction, a steeplejack fell through a section of roof to his doom. Others that a student professor living within the building through the early 1900s died of a severe ailment within, and others still that through the 1950s a priest passed on while watching a movie in the hall's theater. Whatever the case, those who frequent Washington have reported lights flicking on and off by themselves, doors that open and close quickly as if someone unseen is passing through them, disembodied footsteps, the phantom sounds of a French horn, and an overall unsettling feeling experienced by any who wander about alone, especially after dark. By far the most renowned of Washington Hall's ghost stories pertains to the life and death of one George Gipp, who was a respected Notre Dame football player through the early 20th century, and who, through December of 1920, missed curfew and was accidentally locked out of his dorm within the hall. Scared of facing repercussions, George attempted to sleep on Washington's front step through what was actually a particularly bad snowstorm, sadly resulting in him contracting pneumonia and ultimately in his own death. As this story is told, in his final moments, George looked his coach, Newt Rockne, in the eyes and uttered these now legendary words: "Tell the boys to go in there with all they've got and win just one for the Gipper." This anecdote would later be utilized by Rockne in 1928 to rally his team into a 12-6 upset against the previously undefeated Army team, and it would result in Jack Chevney making his "That's one for the Gipper" game-tying touchdown at Yankee Stadium. Incidentally, many now claim the spirit of George Gipp remains within the hall, and his ghost has even supposedly been viewed from time to time riding up and down the stairs through the halls on a spectral white horse. Finally, from the time of the university's establishment, founders, priests, faculty, and other associated parties since deceased have been laid to rest in cemeteries kept on campus grounds. And within these aged graveyards, and usually at night, dark figures have been observed wandering about and placing curious mementos on specific grave sites without explanation. Taking its ridiculously fascinating history into account, and coupling it with such an impressive assortment of ghostly legends and purported encounters with the paranormal, we felt there really was no more perfect choice than the University of Notre Dame as our pick for this list's most haunted place in Indiana. Thanks for joining us for our second list of picks for some of the most haunted places in Indiana. If you enjoyed hearing our histories and ghost stories, subscribe to our channel, like this upload, and share us with anyone you feel deserves a good scare. Pleasant dreams.